Getting up into the topic of chord progressions, we're going to talk about keys, scales, and building the chords themselves. So let's not waste any time and let's get right on to the lesson. The first thing we have to talk about is what is a key. We have to define that term, and if I had to define it and put it in the dictionary, I would say that a key is all of the notes that commonly exist in a song or piece of music. So for instance, the key of C major has 0 sharps, 0 flats. Therefore, all of the white keys exist in the key of C major, meaning none of the notes are sharp or flat. Now, the key of G, however, has 1 sharp. So the key kind of defines that, the key of G has the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then back to G. And there's many different types of keys. There's keys with sharps and keys with flats. So just remember that. And understanding your key signatures is really important in being able to come up with these chord progressions, because when you develop the chords based around these keys, then you'll know where the sharps and flats fit. So remember that a key is really all the notes that are commonly found in a piece of music or a passage of music. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what is a scale. So basically this goes hand in hand with what is a key. So basically if you put, what a scale is if you put all the notes that exist within a key in alphabetical order, meaning musical alphabetical order, meaning when you get to G, after G you repeat, and you really start on the note of the key that you're on. So if you're in C major, you're starting on C, you're playing to the next C, and you're playing all the keys in between. That's a scale. And that's all the notes that exist in C major, just put in order from beginning to end, starting on C. Same thing with G major, you just start on G, you play all the notes in between, keeping in mind that the key of G has an F sharp in it, like that. So let me draw out a scale for us. There we have our C major scale written out in eighth notes here. So this is what the scale looks like, right? It starts on a certain note, it starts on C, ends on C, and has all the notes in between, right? So that is the C major scale. Now let's change it to a G major scale, and we'll get to the chords in just a minute, I promise, but it's very important to know this. So these are all the notes in the G major scale. Like I said, though, that we do have an F sharp up here. So these are all of the notes that exist in G major from beginning to end. Now let's just do a key I haven't talked about today yet, just to change it up a little bit. So let's do F major. So we got to drag it down to F major. So it's going from F to F, and we have to have a B flat in there. Knowing your key signatures is a whole nother lesson. If you don't know your key signatures, I have a Master Your Key Signatures and Circle of Fifths in one lesson, and I'll put that down in the description when you watch this video. After the video is over, you can check that out, or if you want to catch up on knowing your key signatures. But we're going to continue. So here we have F major. These are all the notes that exist in that key. So if you have a song that's in F major, it's mainly going to be using these notes. Mainly. We'll get to that in a little bit. So now we're going to talk about what is a scale degree, the third thing on our list for this evening, or for today rather. Now, a scale degree is simply what note of the scale it is. So how many notes do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Well, why didn't I say 8 when there's clearly 8 notes there? Well, it's because this note right here and this note right here are the same exact note. So we don't count those twice. We just count them both as one, and those are called scale degrees. Although you can refer to that one as 8. I don't think anybody will freak out too bad if you do. Okay, now let me explain the next part. Okay, one thing I want to point out is we have our scale, right? What you can do on any scale is build triads on all of the notes. And you do that by making evenly spaced notes on each of the bottom notes. So you have like basically looks like a stacked snowman. We call those root position triads. And I only messed this one up and this one up. But it's good to illustrate that they need to look like very evenly stacked. So if this one begins on a space, the rest of these need to be spaces. If this is a line, these need to be the next lines up. Things like that. They need to be evenly spaced. Now here's the thing you have to consider, right? We have one flat in this scale in the key of F. This B flat is in all of our chords. So we have to go back when we do our chords and fill in the B flats. And we forgot just one right up top here. There we go. So now instead of 8 notes, or basically 7 individual notes, we now have 7 unique chords, right? The same kind of numbering structure as before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now, or 1 rather, actually, as I explained it earlier. So now we have our 8 chords, or 7 chords, you know what I mean, and the first and last one are the same. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1. Now, what is a chord progression? Finally, we are getting to the meat of the lesson, right? Because it's all about chord progressions. And so far, I haven't been talking about that. But we have been leading up to it, and maybe didn't realize. All chord progression is a progression or a pattern of chords that's used in a song. So what do I mean by that? Well, say in a song, I want to have, maybe 4 different chords. I want to start, usually you want to start with the 1 chord, right? And say I just want to move to the 2 chord, 3 chord, and then maybe the 1 chord up here. Right, if I chose that pattern and picked out these individual chords, and I repeated it in the song, that would be our chord progression. So to reiterate, a chord progression is just a pattern of chords that you use over and over again during the song. Now, don't get me wrong, you can change the chord progression throughout the song. It's just that you will find it very commonly repeated. So now we're going to do another example. We are actually going to do this now in the key of G and the key of F. So here are the differences that we have to be aware of. So first of all, we move all the chords. Luckily, because I have a computer, I can move all the notes all up at once where I need them to be. But this time, what did I mention earlier? The key of G has what sharped? What do you think? Well, F sharp, right? So therefore, when we build our chords, anytime we come across an F in our chords, it's got to be sharped. So let's do that on paper, and I'll show you what that's like. Okay, now you can go through the chords and write out the sharps where they are, or you can write in what we call the key signature. And this key signature in the beginning right here, this sharp here and here, they are both basically in the same place. They're over the note F. I mean, different places on the keyboard, but they're both Fs. So therefore, what this key signature is telling us is that every F is sharp. That's exactly what we need. So it automatically fills in the sharps where we need them. And again, we have 7 unique chords, 8 in total. And, if you choose any pattern of these chords, say I go from the first one to the 4th one to the 5th one, back to the first one, that's a chord progression because I basically picked the chords that exist within our key, called the diatonic chords, by the way, and I basically picked a pattern of which I wanted to choose to go around them. You can do, there are a ton of other options for chord progressions. The most common chord progression is 1, and then 4, 5, and then back to 1. Or you can even go back to your original one. So you can go. And that's one of your most common chord progressions. 1, 4, 5, 1. Meaning basically that you're taking the first note of the scale, you're building a chord on that, you're going to the fourth note of the scale, you're building a chord on that, you're going to the fifth note of the scale, building on that, and then you're going back to your first chord, or if you want to play it up an octave. Okay, so now one thing I want to mention is that every major scale, if you build chords on them, have a pattern of major and minor chords that you have to be aware of. These are the same for every major key, not minor keys though. Minor keys have its own unique kind of pattern. So here we go. The first chord in any major key is major. I'm going to write an uppercase M for major, lowercase m, and I'm actually going to put a little slash for minor. So the first chord's always major, second chord's always minor, third chord is always minor. What do you think about the fourth chord? Well, oops. Yep, that was right. Now, remember what we said in our lesson, if you haven't seen it, about hearing the difference between chords. It sounds bright and happy, right? So this is a major chord. 5 is also major. 6 is minor. 7 is what we call diminished. It doesn't sound very, I'm going to write D-I-M. Doesn't sound very pleasant. And then, of course, because the first chord and the last chord are the same, they are major. So every major scale or every major key has a pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and then back to major. So just keep that in mind, because when you are crafting a song and coming up with a chord progression, you want to think about the moods that each chord conveys. So, right? So if you're going for maybe a sadder part of the song or something, maybe you don't want to do all major chords. Maybe if it's melancholy or it's a mixed emotion kind of thing, you can do a mixture of major and minors. And now there are, like I said, standard chord progressions, but if you go around these progressions and kind of maybe come up with a few of your own, you can still find ones that sound good to you. But, as far as what's common in, classical music and things like that, and even more modern music, like rock music, the chord progression 1, 4, 5, 1 is super crucial. So in every chord progression, you don't always have to go back to the first chord. That's just a very good way of ending a piece of music. Like if you start on one chord, the first chord, and end on the first chord, then the whole piece or the whole section will sound really final. Sure, you could definitely end on a very strange chord. Let's see, like... something like that where it's unexpected, or even something like that. So yeah, absolutely, you can definitely go to a different key, or not a different key, a different you can end on a different chord than the one you started with. You can also use any combination of chords, but some sound better than others, right? So here's the thing, is that each of these chords has a function, and basically the first and last chord is known as the tonic, and that really helps establish the key, right? Well, maybe you don't know that, but that's okay. So they help establish the key. So if you ever, and the thing is that if you use too many chords that are not within what I'm talking about here, the song will lack direction. So let me explain this though. So you have tonics on either end, and then you actually have number 2 is called the super tonic. I'm not even making this up. This is really what it's called. Then the third one is called the super tonic. Now I am just kidding, because it's actually called the median. Sorry for my doctor's handwriting here. I know it's not very good. And then you have, so that's number 3. Number 4, you have the not making this up either, subdominant. Just going to write subdom. And then here you have the dominant, which is number 5. You have the median. Just going to write med. You have the leading tone. Going to write LT. Back to the tonic. So here's the thing to understand is that in a piece of music, in terms of giving it its direction, the most important ones are tonic, subdominant, dominant, and tonic. Well, hey, and those are called primary chords, by the way. Now, hey, is that weird? That's the chord progression I gave you earlier. 1, 4, 5, back to 1. And that's because this chord progression is so important and so well used, or widely used, is because it establishes the key, right? And this is just something that they've developed like through sound and how music fits together through years and years, is that, the tonic chords lead well into the subdominant chords, into the dominant chords, back to the tonic chords. You can use all these other ones for sure, and you don't have to use them in that exact order I gave you, but those ones establish the key. So here's what I really mean by all this. So if you use, say you make a chord progression of the super tonic, and then how about the mediate, and then how about the leading tone, and we'll see what we think, right? Like I said, some of them definitely work better than others. So here's the super tonic. Now I'm going to go into the, oh, by the way, this one is the submediate. I should have written sub up here. So here we go. Anyway, we're going to the super tonic, to the submediate, to the leading tone. Not really pleasing, right? And by the way, the leading tone chord almost always leads you back to the tonic. Not 100% of the time, but probably like 97.9% of the time. So you can use any combination of chords, but just remember that if you have to have like kind of a direction in terms of the key. So if you use too many chords outside of the tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic kind of thing, then it'll just kind of sound lost and it will lack what we call tonal direction. So let's do an example. So say you have watched this lesson and you're going to your sheet of paper and you're like, all right, I'm ready to write my chord progression or play it on the piano. What did he say, or how do I begin the process of figuring out my chord progression? Step number 1 is write out the scale, or look up the scale of the key that you're in, and also look up, the sharps or flats that are contained in that key. So let's say we have the key of D major, and if you look that up, or if you know, the key of D major has 2 sharps, so we'll write it in our key signature right here. So the first thing you want to do is write the scale that you need. So I'll write it right here. So basically remember that a scale is from one letter. So if we're in the key of D, it starts with D. It also ends with D all the way up here. And it has all the notes in between. Okay, so here we have our scale, right? We have the notes D, E, F, sharp. Now, if you're not familiar with your keys, or you're not as familiar with them, I would actually write in the sharps where they should appear. And there's a sharp right here in our key signature as well. So therefore, there is our key, right? That's the first thing you want to do, is lay out the key and the scale. Second thing you want to do is build triads on all of your notes. If you're doing that on the keyboard, instead of playing the notes separately in the scale, you're stacking chords on top of them, keeping in mind that anytime you hit an F or a C, or whatever's in the key signature, you have to make sure that's there. Now we have our 8 chords. The next thing I would do is just kind of like label your chords, right? Now the whole subdominant, dominant thing, I wouldn't get too crazy about that. That was just kind of an explanation for you for this lesson, but we'll go more detail about that actually over my website. I have a course that's really good, a music theory course that really gets into this stuff. But anyway, so you want to, then now that your chords are laid out, practice going through different chords. So maybe I'll start a safe bet. If you want to play it safe, start on 1, play it safe. And then let's see, I want to go to 2. 2 comes after 1, never let me down. Let's say we want to go then to 5. And then let's say we want to go to 8. Why not? Playing it safe again, ending on the 1 chord or the 8 chord. Now, how many of these chords are what we call the primary chords, the 1, 4, 5, or 8? Well, let's see. 3 out of the 4 chords are the primary chords, so this should sound really good. It should have really good tonal direction. Should be able to hear what key it's centered around and things like that. So here we go. Here's our chord progression. Then you play the chords separately, keeping in mind where the sharps or flats are. So then you can, maybe a lot of times they put chords at the bottom, and then you can put a melody on top. So I just literally used those chords in my left hand there, and that's the chord progression. What else can I say about it? Now, like I said, there's many types of chord progressions. Practice around with these. Let me know in the comments what chord progressions you come up with. Do you have one that's really out there that sounds really, really good? Let me know. I really want to share those with you. Some other pretty good ones are 2-5-1 or 2-5-8. And then, maybe like 1-4-7-1. That would be like, let's see what key we're in. That one's a good one. 7-1 is always a good bet, because 7, the leading tone, leads you back to 1, or what we call the tonic. So then the big question is, can you use a chord outside of the scale? Remember that all the chords in the scale are called diatonic chords, so there are actually non-diatonic chords. But remember this, that you run a risk when you use them. They are a great way to add flavor to a chord progression. However, if you overuse them or use them incorrectly, they will sound downright bad. So let's talk about some pretty good safe bet chord progressions for you. So now I'm in the key of C and I'm ready to make my chord progression. So where can we fit in a non-diatonic chord, meaning it has notes? Basically, since we're in the key of C, any non-diatonic notes are any of these, right? So any chord that has any of those are non-diatonic chords. So here are a couple of safe bets for you. Safe bets meaning if you use these, they will sound good. So I would start with 1, the safe bet. I just said we weren't taking the safe bet. But we're going to go from 1 to 4. So basically, if you're trying to figure out what numbers these are, if you know the scale of the piano, you just count up 4, like I said, build the chord on it. Now, what we're going to do is instead of playing 5, which would be the 1-4-5 chord progression, we're actually going to replace that with flat 3, which is an E flat major chord. So you have C major, F major, E flat major, and then, you could go to another chord after that, or you could go, of course, back to 1. So basically, what I did in this chord progression is I replaced 5 with flat 3. So how do you figure out what flat 3 is? What do I mean by that? So you go up to the 3rd note of the scale, you flat it, and you make a major chord on it. That is flat 3. Okay, what are some other options? Another good option is flat 6. So you go to the 6th note of the scale, or whatever key that you're in. Remember to abide by any sharps or flats you may have. You flat that, and then you build a major chord on it. So basically here, not too bad, right? Like if I make a song based on this. Kind of a cool flavor to it. Another safe bet is the flat 7. Notice how a lot of these are flats. So you do that. Luckily, I can move all the notes up at once. So you go back, basically you go up to the 7th note of the scale, which is B. You flat it, make a major chord. You may notice there's a pattern in figuring these out. So flat 3, you go to the 3rd note, flat it. Flat 6, 6th note, flat it. And then the 7th, you go to the 7th. And then you flat it just like that. So here is what this will sound like. as well. Okay, there's one more thing I want to mention in this lesson, and that is when you see the numbers written out like this in, fancy music theory books, or, maybe you see, a songwriter or something, a lot of times they won't write out the numbers as, these standard numerals. They write them as Roman numerals. So here we go. We have 1. We have, 8, but I'm going to write it as 1. We have 2. Right? So they just write them in Roman numerals. Now you may be wondering why some of them are uppercase, some of them are lowercase. Well, that really is because, and that one has a circle next to it, because uppercase signifies that it's major. Minor is designated by the lowercase. So remember that I said there's a pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, diminished, back to major. That, by the way, diminished is a lowercase Roman numeral with a little circle next to it, and then an augmented chord, which we don't have any here, would be a Roman numeral with a plus next to it, just for reference, because you will see, if you're into chord progressions, these Roman numerals. In fact, you may be looking at websites where they just list them as that, and you're like, what does that mean? Well, those correlate literally to the scale degrees that we have right here that we talked about today. So that is how it all fits together. So now that we've reached the end of the lesson, you should be able to kind of chart out your own chord progressions. Remember, you want to come up with the key, right? Write out the scale, write out the chords built on the notes of that scale, and then pick a pattern of chords to walk through to make your song. And then, you can put those in the left hand while you improvise in the right hand, or write notes in the right hand, or something like that, or with different instruments. You could have the chords with some instruments, and then some instruments playing a melody. How to write a good melody is an entirely different lesson in and of itself. And then also, by watching this whole lesson, now you should be able to know what the Roman numerals are about on all those websites, and finally know what they are talking about.
If you really thought this lesson was enriching and you got a lot out of it, and you're still looking to master your key signatures because it really helps in building these chord progressions, you really need to check out my lesson on the circle of fifths and mastering your chord progressions. It's highly, highly recommended if you want to write chord progressions of your own and get really good at this sort of thing. And by the way, I also have a ton of courses over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. You can find a link in the description, but check it out when you get a chance. And thanks for coming today, and I'll talk to you in the next lesson. Thank you so much.